Hey review family, keep it high, keep it tight. My name is Jay Morris, reviewing music for the love of music, and welcome back to the Metal Tempest. And in this video, I'm going to be covering the new Hissing record entitled Hypervirulence Architecture. Man, I have been so excited for the release of this record ever since a single released 2 weeks ago and 4 weeks ago. These guys are a trio coming out of Seattle, Washington, and sort of toe the line between death metal, black metal, and experimental, as well as noise. My first exposure to them was their very first full-length studio-length record back in 2018, Permanent Destitution, which the label actually sent my way back around the time it released, and it really got me hooked because I spun it on my record system, didn't have really any preconceived notions of them, but Profound Lore just continued to prove why they're one of the best labels for signing just some hellish releases. And if you haven't checked out this release, Permanent Destitution, check it out. It was released back in 2018, and if it slipped through the cracks for you, don't let it. It is wonderful. After the release of that record, I went back and listened to their splits, their EPs, their demos, and specifically, I think this is the record that stands out the most, Permanent Destitution, because it turned me on to their style, which just infected me instantaneously. Their style is what I would describe as a dense, impenetrable fortress of death and black metal mixed with a hellish wall of noise. That's sort of where the experimentation comes, and it's similar to what you would get from a band like Human Serpent, but a lot more catchy and a lot more groovy. I also appreciated how they broke up the monotony by employing different types of vocals from black metal and death metal, not just being the cookie cutter death growls and not just being the shrieked black metal vocals. They kind of do layer a little bit, but they've always kind of been a side piece to the centerpiece that is the noise. So this record is around the same amount of length. It, I believe, is like 3 or 4 minutes longer than Permanent Destitution, and it's a lot of the same thing that was on that record, but I do think there are some key differences from that record to this one. One thing that I did notice about this sophomore record is they are very simplistic and it sometimes hide behind the distortion and the noise. Upon first listen, you are hit with claustrophobia and cacophony. Everything moves at a frantic speed. They don't usually know how to slow down that much, and even when they do, it's still layered with so much noise and distortion that it's a flurry of just complete and total hell. Every track here has a mechanical and I wouldn't even say mechanical, I'd say metallic edge to it. Much like this record, just like an industrial factory whirring at the exact same time, with every machine just having like a haywire malfunction. But upon the second listen that I gave to this record, considering it was very short, I found that many of the death metal moments are pretty cookie cutter. I also wish that there was a little bit more dynamics when it came to the vocals, because every time that the death growls go into these black metal shrieks, I found them to be very exciting and broke it up a little more, but they do sit in the death growl territory more often than they don't. And as much of an advocate as I am for this band, I can admit and acknowledge their flaws in maybe being a little bit of a one-trick pony. This record has that fatigue-inducing feeling of how much noise and distortion do you have to really say something. This record sounds phenomenal in terms of production, and I have no doubt that whatever was put into the mix of this record took a hell of a lot of time. But by the same token, it does sometimes just reek of having a lot of noise, having a lot of sound waves, but not doing too much of anything to leave a lasting impact. I feel like Permanent Destitution was thicker, had more layers to it, and felt a lot more raw, and that's what gripped me in. This record just feels like a lot of other dingy and underground death metal records, but with a lot more sharp noise to it. But that noise doesn't have much intelligence to it, and more so is just the feedback that you get from most noise projects put into a death metal band. And maybe it's just on the tip of my tongue that like there are a ton of death metal bands and black metal bands specifically that employ a lot of noise, so I might be a bit numb and desensitized to what separates good from bad, but I really did find myself wanting more from this record a lot of times. Is it very tight? Yes, it's razor tight. It's so well packed together, and the mix is very good. But through the walls of chaos and the layers of cacophony, I don't feel like this record does much to keep me wanting to come back to it and dissect it. But if I can give a compliment, some of these riffs are surprisingly catchy for being such a noisy and a chaotic and all over the place scatterbrained record. I did find myself impressed by the riffs a lot of times, even though they're not that original or something that Hissing didn't do better on their last record. I hate to compare records, but in this case, when they're both so similar, but one, in my opinion, just stands so high above the other, it's kind of hard not to draw that comparison in. Overall, it's a very well produced Blackened death metal record with a lot of noise, and if that's what you're looking for, it will certainly scratch a certain itch. But I found myself a little unsatisfied going back to this record for the second time because it sort of revealed just how simplistic this record is. And while simplicity isn't necessarily a bad thing, when you have a record that demands so much from the listener from the auditory way, the sensory just itch scratching isn't as satisfying as I maybe wish it would have been. And I really don't see why I wouldn't just go back to Permanent Destitution if I wanted to listen to Hissing, because I think it's just overall a cleaner, better produced, and better sounding record, so I definitely suggest this one over the current one. And overall, I'm going to be giving this album a 5.5 out of 10. And that is a wrap. Have you heard this new Hissing record, Hypervirulence Architecture? If you have, let me know in the comment section below what you thought about it. I would love to discuss this record with you. Be sure to like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to join the review family today, and smash that notification bell to be notified of my future uploads. You know who it is. My name is Jay Morris, and I'm signing off saying fair.